This will sound very strange, but the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, the explosion of reactor number 4, and the synagogue shooting in 2018 in which 4 police officers were wounded, and the synagogue shooting in 2019 in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot, and the hostage-taking in the synagogue in Texas in 2022, in which a 44-year-old British Pakistani, armed with a pistol, took 4 people hostage, are stunning prophecies that are pointing to the date that Israel will destroy, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on October 9th, 2023. This event will then lead to Israel bombing with a nuclear bomb and completely destroying Damascus, Syria. And this is predicted to occur on October 26th, 2023. It will be the first nuclear bomb used in an act of war since World War II. The post date for this video, the date that this video is posted, proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The analysis in this video explains how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date August 26th, 2023, and why it was believed that this would be the predicted date that Israel would bomb Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. Since the time of the original production of this video, God's signs have revealed more knowledge, and instead of bombing Iran on August 26th, August 26th ended up being an important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. It is now predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on October 9th, 2023. August 26th was the day that the host of the TV game show The Price is Right, Bob Barker, died at the age of 99, 9 days before September 4th. September 4th was the day of the prophetic Burning Man sign, the amazing details of which are explained in the must-watch Burning Man prophecy video. Every year at the end of the Burning Man festival, 70,000 quote-unquote burners leave en masse in what is called the Exodus. This year, the Exodus was a muddy disaster when the Playa Desert sand turned to mud due to unprecedented rain. The quote-unquote burners were trapped for days before they were finally allowed to begin the Exodus at 14 o'clock local time on September 4th, 1400 military time. The reason the Exodus began at 14 o'clock was because the disastrous Burning Man Exodus is symbolism for an evacuation, and it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant and cause an evacuation in southwest Iran on October 9th, 14 days after it is predicted that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke will be detonated in Manhattan, New York City, and cause an evacuation of Manhattan Island on September 25th. More is explained in the Burning Man video, but this is also why DJ Diplo and Chris Rock were part of this Burning Man news story, and why the video of them leaving Burning Man in the back of a pickup truck went viral. They left Burning Man with Austin Butler, who played Elvis in the recent Elvis movie, and also on September 4th was the world premiere of the new movie about Elvis's relationship with 14-year-old Priscilla. Also, the predicted evacuation in southwest Iran on October 9th will be 35 days after the prophetic Exodus evacuation from Burning Man on September 4th, and the nation of Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. And the 35th chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Bible is a prophecy about the parched land of the desert becoming a pool of water, and about a road that God's ransomed will travel on called Highway of Holiness. The burners in their exodus out of the parched land that had been turned to pools of water traveled down what is called Gate Road. And in the Bible, judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gate. The prophetic Burning Man exodus on September 4th, that was the result of sand turning to mud, was 9 days after Bob Barker died at the age of 99 on August 26th. And Barker is famous for his fight scene in a movie with Jewish comedian Adam Sandler, in which Sandler is thrown into water and is soaking wet, which hints at the sand turning to mud at Burning Man 9 days after Sandler's tribute tweet to Barker on the day he died at the age of 99. Barker rhymes with Bashur, and the fight between Barker and the Jewish comedian hints at the fight between the Jewish nation Israel and Iran when Israel will bomb Iran's Bashur nuclear power plant. Barker hosted the TV game show The Price is Right for a record 35 years, and Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. The name Bob Barker in English gematria is equal to 444, and on the day that the host of The Price is Right died, news broke that the U.S. Marines are buying, for the right price, 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers. This was on August 26th, which is 44 days before it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bashur nuclear power plant on October 9th, which will be 17 days before it is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria on October 26th and fulfill Isaiah chapter 17. In Hebrew gematria, Damascus, Syria is 999. And in the Bible, the number 9 is symbolic of God's judgment. And in the Bible, the city of Damascus is symbolic of the world. God will judge the world that will be led by the Antichrist after it attempts to destroy Israel and make Jerusalem an international city. It is predicted that there will be an evacuation in southwest Iran 14 days after it is predicted that there will be an evacuation in New York City on September 25th. September 25th will be exactly 9 years, which symbolizes judgment, after the birth of the second of 2 prophetic cows, born with the number 7 on its forehead. These cows pointed to the king of Egypt's dream in the Bible about 14 cows. In the dream, the 14 cows are separated into 2 sets of 7 cows, and the latter 7 cows are symbolic of the end times period of 7 years of the Antichrist. In Bible prophecy, it is said that this symbolic 7 years of the Antichrist begins after 69 sets of 7 years. This is why at the same time that the 7 cow was born on September 25th, 2014, the Antichrist spoke at the opening of the 69th UN General Assembly in New York City, which is exactly 9 years, which symbolizes judgment, before it is predicted that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke will explode in New York City, which will lead to an evacuation of New York City, and this will be 14 days before it is predicted that there will be an evacuation in southwest Iran after it is bombed by Israel. These 14 days in between these 2 evacuations are hinted at with this connection to the 14 cows. It was known since January that God was pointing to May 17th and May 20th regarding Israel bombing Iran and Damascus, Syria. And as will be explained in these videos, on May 17th we received the prophetic sign that was the vandalized tomb of Joseph in the northern West Bank territory. And on May 20th was the G7 summit in Hiroshima, Japan, the location that the first nuclear bomb was used in an act of war. And on May 20th was the surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima of the first Jewish president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, who at the beginning of the war with Russia had just turned 44 years old, when Ukraine was made up of 44 million people. God is using Vladimir Zelensky as symbolism for the Antichrist, who is the 44th president. As described in Bible prophecy, the Jews in Jerusalem will flee Judea because of the 44th president Antichrist, similar to how there was an exodus of people from the nation that was 44 million, led by the first Jewish president at the age of 44. The surprise visit of the first Jewish president of Ukraine to the G7 summit at the location where the first nuclear bomb was dropped was 4 times 4 days after the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million nation made a surprise visit to the International Criminal Court, which was set up for the purpose of conducting court trials regarding war crimes. And after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, the world, led by the 44th president, will gang up on Israel and accuse it of war crimes. And as will be explained in these videos, Damascus, Syria is symbolized by the number 444. It is predicted that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on August 26, 2023. This will be exactly 4 times 4 months after April 26, 2022. And although it isn't completely related to the subject of this video, on April 26, 2022, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris tweeted and announced that she had the CVD disease 44 days after the 44th president tweeted and announced that he had the CVD disease. The 44th president will become the president again through the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on October 17, 2023. After this introduction to this video, the rest of this video will be an explanation for how God's signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date April 26th in relation to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. It was known since 2021 that God was pointing to April 26th, and prior to April 26th, it was believed that this would be the date that Israel would bomb Iran. Instead, however, on this day, a big news story regarded the White House's statement that Iran's breakout time has been reduced from a year to weeks. The White House stated that it was very concerned about this. The breakout time refers to the amount of time it would take Iran to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear bomb. This was a new development regarding Iran's nuclear program, and it coincidentally occurred on April 26th, the date that was known ahead of time since 2021. This statement from the White House came after Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's testimony in a U.S. Senate hearing earlier in this day. He told Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Senator Bob Menendez that Iran's breakout time had been reduced from a year to weeks. This emphasis on weeks was a sign that God gave us that indicated that the day that Israel will nuke Iran is weeks away. but just how many weeks is the question. It is explained in the Chariots of Fire prophecy video how the prophetic signs on April 26th revealed adding 3 weeks to April 26th. This gave us May 17th. Sure enough, on May 17th, we received stunning prophetic signs related to Israel bombing Iran, and these signs were expected in advance prior to May 17th. These prophetic signs that occurred on April 26th that revealed adding 3 weeks included the senator from the third state to join the Union, Senator Bob Menendez, and signs that pointed to a prophecy in the book of Daniel in the Bible in which the archangel Michael is held up by the prince of Persia for 3 weeks. The Persian Empire was located where modern-day Iran is located. Adding exactly 3 weeks to April 26th gave us May 17th. This analysis of adding 3 weeks to April 26th to get May 17th was known immediately following April 26th, and therefore May 17th, 2022 was known in advance, predicted in advance, to be a relevant date regarding Israel bombing Iran. And then on May 17th, we received the absolutely stunning prophetic signs that confirmed this analysis. On May 17th, it was first reported that for the first time ever, Israel would be conducting a simulation of a wide-scale attack on Iran and its nuclear facilities. This simulation drill over the Mediterranean Sea was part of the largest in decades large-scale military drill war exercise that the Israeli Defense Forces named Chariots of Fire. On this same May 17th day, recording artist Vangelis died. Vangelis won an Oscar Academy Award for composing the song Chariots of Fire. There are so many amazing things regarding these signs that occurred on May 17th. These signs are explained in full detail in the absolute must-watch Chariots of Fire prophecy video on this channel. These prophetic signs on May 17th that include the Israeli military drill named Chariots of Fire and the death of the composer of the track Chariots of Fire were 365 days before May 17th, 2023, a date that was also predicted ahead of time to be relevant regarding Israel bombing Iran. More will be explained regarding May 17th, 2023 in another video. In the Bible, the prophet Elijah and Enoch were taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. The Bible records that Enoch was taken to heaven at the age of 365. Therefore, in this context, this 365 days is symbolism that connects to the chariots of fire symbolism in the prophetic signs on May 17th, 2022. This connection between Enoch, who died at age 365, and chariots of fire is one of many reasons for how it was known ahead of time that May 17th, 2023 would be relevant in the trail of signs leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. Again, these signs on May 17th were predicted in advance because May 17th was exactly 3 weeks after April 26th, and the day that the Secretary of Defense announced to the senator from the third state that Iran's breakout time had been reduced 2 weeks. And also, as explained in the Chariots of Fire video, on April 26th, there were prophetic signs that pointed to the 3 weeks that the Archangel Michael was held up by the Prince of Persia, and today Persia is Iran. This is one reason why another relevant date in the trail of signs leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran was December 27th, 2022, which was another date that was known in advance of the date and was 33 weeks and 3 days after May 17th, which in turn was exactly 3 weeks after April 26th. As well, composer Vangelis's music gained a wider audience in the late 1970s for his music that was used in the soundtrack for Carl Sagan's PBS documentary series Cosmos. The series Cosmos is still to this day the most ever watched PBS documentary series in the world. The musical theme track for the series, which is used in the opening of each of the 13 episodes, is Vangelis's track titled Movement 3. Movement 3 is from Vangelis's album titled Heaven and Hell. The reason God pointed to Carl Sagan and Cosmos is because God is pointing to the great deception and lies within the agnostic atheist worldview that is leading countless numbers of people to hell. Also, Carl Sagan is known for his speculations regarding alien life on other planets. God is pointing to the soon-coming alien deception that the agnostic atheists will fall for. The truth regarding aliens and UFOs is that they are demons masquerading as aliens. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction being made in this video is to prove this. What is important here is that after Israel will bomb Iran and nuke Damascus, the demons that will pretend to be aliens will claim to be here in order to help us with our nuclear weapons. And this is why God has brought into this trail of signs Carl Sagan, who is known for his speculating about aliens, and speculated about the existence of aliens in his docuseries Cosmos. From the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist, as for example, Haman persecuted the Jews in Persia on the 2 13th days of the month. This is why, for example, Trump's missile killed Iranian General Soleimani on the date January 3rd, 1-3, which hints at 13. This is also why on the day of the news regarding Israel's Chariots of Fire exercise to practice bombing Iran, the composer of Chariots of Fire died in order to point to the Antichrist PBS series Cosmos, which is 13 episodes and 13 hours long. Another reason why Vangelis's Movement 3 track was the opening music to each of the 13 episodes of this series Cosmos that was 13 hours long is because 3 divided by 13 equals 0.230. One reason for this is that Israel will bomb Iran in 2023. I will explain more regarding the prophetic relevance of 3 divided by 13 in a minute. And also, the number 23 reveals the identity of the Antichrist, Barack Obama, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, and President Cleveland, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipped the 23rd presidency, just like how Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms and will become the president again, and the Antichrist who will persecute God's people and persecute Israel in 2023. God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together in order to confirm the signs and connections because the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23. Vangelis composed Movement number 3, the introductory track for the 13-episode Cosmos series, and again this was exactly 3 weeks after April 26th, and one of the many confirmations for knowing ahead of time the prophetic significance of April 26th is that it was 44 days after the date 3/13, which hints at 3 divided by 13 equals 0.230. This was the day that the 44-year-old GOAT, greatest of all time of football, Tom Brady, announced in a tweet that he would return for a 23rd season of football. And this was the same day that the 44th president, GOAT, Antichrist, who wore jersey number 23, announced in a tweet that he had COVID 23 days before he returned to the White House for the first time. It was also the day of the prophetic bomb explosions by Iranian missiles that targeted Israelis and landed just outside of the U.S. consulate in Iraq. This date 313 was known almost an entire year in advance, and it was known to be a date in which to expect a prophetic explosion, bomb, sign. Vangelis' Movement 3 track from Cosmos is why Vangelis died 3 weeks after April 26th and 33 weeks and 3 days before the prophetic signs that occurred on December 27th, 2022, prophetic signs that are related to Israel bombing Iran and nuking Damascus, and I will explain these signs in a minute. And then I will explain how December 27th connects to the date that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria. In the Bible, the number 50 and a period of 50 years is extremely prophetic and symbolic. Vangelis' music career spanned 50 years and included over 50 albums. Vangelis is known for his role in the 1970s rock band Aphrodite's Child. Their famous, critically acclaimed album is titled 666. The lyrics in the 666 album are about the prophetic book of Revelation in the Bible, the book about end times prophecy, the book about the end times period, which we are currently in, which is why Vangelis' death is a big part of this trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran and nuke Damascus. As well, the number 666, the number of the Antichrist, comes from the book of Revelation. June in 2022 was the 50th anniversary of the release of this album. 50 years is also 600 months, and Noah in the Bible was 600 years old at the time that the flood judgment began. This connection to the album named 666 and Vangelis' death was part of the confirmation for adding exactly 6 weeks to May 17th to reach June 27th. June 27th was also exactly 3 times 3 weeks after the signs on April 26th that included the breakout time being reduced to weeks, the senator from the 3rd state, and Archangel Michael being held up by the Prince of Persia for 3 weeks. This exact 3 times 3 weeks between April 26th and June 27th is also 9 weeks, and the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. As is explained in more amazing detail in the Chariots of Fire video, the movie Chariots of Fire is about Eric Liddell and the prophetic shining moment of his running career, which was a testament to the God of the Bible, was his win after the 1924 Olympics, in which he was wearing number 9, seen here in this most iconic photo of Eric Liddell. More is explained in the absolute must-watch Chariots of Fire video. June 27th was also exactly 99 weeks after the explosion in Beirut that registered a 3.3 magnitude earthquake with the USGS, which is more confirmation of the 9 weeks, which is 3 times 3 weeks, connection between April 26th and June 27th. April 26th was also exactly 90 weeks after the Beirut explosion. On June 27th, the Israeli Knesset was dissolved, and leadership of the nation was given to Yair Lapid. The name Lapid means flame or torch, which is stunning confirmation of the connection between June 27th and May 17th and the Chariots of Fire signs and the Olympics, and Vangelis, who composed the track Chariots of Fire in memory of his father, who was an Olympic athlete. The news headlines noted that the dissolving of the Knesset meant a 5th election for Israel in 3.5 years. In Bible prophecy, a symbolic period of 3.5 years is mentioned 7 times in regards to the period of the Antichrist's rule in the end times. This 3.5 years is mentioned in the book of Revelation in chapter 12. Chapter 12 regards a woman giving birth and a dragon waiting to devour the child. In the prophecy, the woman symbolizes Israel, and the dragon is symbolism for the Antichrist. On June 27th, the Israeli health minister announced major changes regarding abortion laws in Israel, making it much easier for a woman to have an abortion up to the 12th week of pregnancy. Hence the connection to the birth of the child in Revelation chapter 12. The 12th week is part of the headlines for this story. Exactly 12 weeks after June 27th was the day of 3 simultaneous explosions on the surface of the sun, a strange and very rare occurrence. This hinted at the upcoming explosions in Iran and Damascus, Syria. It occurred on the day of a prophetic football game and a prophetic sign involving the GOAT of football, with whose jersey number is 12, which confirms the 12 weeks connection back to the Israeli announcement regarding 12 weeks for abortions. 12 weeks is 84 days, and the GOAT, Antichrist, was born on the date 8/4, which is what 84 hints at. This prophetic football sign occurred with the score tied 3-3, which confirmed the prophetic 3 simultaneous explosions on the surface of the sun. The prophetic sign in the game was an explosive outburst of rage by one of the players. This sign involving the GOAT of football resulted in player number 13 being ejected from the game and suspended from playing the following week. Again, from the Bible, the number 13 is symbolism for the GOAT Antichrist, hence the GOAT of football and player 13, and is also symbolism for ancient Persia and therefore Iran. And as I will explain in a minute, at the same time as this player 13 prophetic sign, we had a stock market sign that pointed to the number 13. The ejection of player number 13 and this stock market sign involving the number 13 indicated adding 13 weeks to get the signs on December 18th, which included 3 football signs in conjunction with the P22 mountain lion sign, which is explained in the must-watch P22 lion video. One of the football signs that was on December 18th involved the Detroit Lions and their prophetic quarterback, and how the Lions had won 6 out of their last 7 games, which was a miracle for the Detroit Lions, and why this was major sports news. This 6 wins out of their last 7 games hinted at the group of Israeli soldiers that captured the Temple Mount in 1967 on June 7th, the date 6/7 in 1967, thus bringing the Temple Mount under Jewish control for the first time in 19 centuries. They entered the old city through the Lion's Gate, and the surnames of the 2 leaders of this group mean lion and young lion, which pointed to Isaiah chapter 31 and the Lord being like a lion coming down on Mount Zion, the Temple Mount. And the restoration of the Temple Mount is God's plan, and this will come about through the upcoming events regarding Iran and Israel nuking Damascus, Syria. Again, on June 27th, the Israeli Knesset dissolved, and they were headed to their 5th election in 3.5 years, and 3.5 years is prophetic of the end times tribulation in the Bible, including in Revelation chapter 12, the 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, of the dragon's persecution of the woman, and the woman symbolizes Israel. And this chapter describes the woman giving birth. This is in Revelation chapter 12. This day was also the day that they announced 12 weeks for abortions, and this is why we added 12 weeks to get this date here. This was the day that the leader of Iran was in the interview of his was aired on 60 Minutes, in which he said that there was really no signs that he is aware of the Holocaust actually happening. And then the Israeli prime minister tweeted in response to that some images of the Holocaust and a caption that he typed some signs, quote. And this was the day of the stock market sign, which I will explain. But what is amazing is that prior to this date, we were expecting prophetic signs regarding the conflict between Iran and Israel. And then on this day, we had prophetic signs that regarded an actual conflict between the leaders of Iran and Israel. And we were expecting prophetic signs, and the leader of Israel tweeted some signs. This interview aired, and this tweet was tweeted by the Israeli Prime Minister just days before the UN General Assembly and the leaders of nations getting there to give their speeches. And the Israeli Prime Minister was stating that he didn't think it should be possible or good for the Iranian leader to be allowed to come to the UN. And this is all prophetic because it will be the United Nations that will make Jerusalem an international city, which is why also all of these signs, this conflict and these tweets regarding all of this was in context of the United Nations assembling. And that's what makes this also very prophetic. Also, on June 27th, the S&P 500 stock index closed at 3,900.11. First, the 500th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word meaning Antichrist. Second, the 390th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word meaning return, which was used by the Apostle James when he quoted Amos 9:11 from the Old Testament that regards the Lord returning to rebuild his temple in Jerusalem, in Israel. Hence why this 3,900.11 close. The 911 hint at Amos 9:11, which uses the word return, which James quoted in the New Testament, which is the 390th word in the Greek Concordance. Third, the 1300th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word meaning lightning. Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. The name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. The word Barak means lightning. The word Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. For example, it is said in Isaiah chapter 14 that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven. And in Aramaic, the language Jesus would have spoken, the word for from is O. Hence, Barack Obama is lightning from heaven. God often emphasizes a number by repeating it 3 times. 3,900 is 1,300 plus 1,300 plus 1,300. From the Bible, the number 13 is symbolism for the Antichrist, as Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews in Persia on the 2 13th days of the month, and the 2 antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. The number 13 is associated with the Antichrist, and Haman, in the book of Esther in the Bible, persecuted the Jews in ancient Persia, which is today Iran, on the 2 13th days of the month. This is why the number 13 is associated with the Antichrist that will rule the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and why the number 13 is associated with ancient Persia, which today is Iran. This stock market sign that pointed to the number 13 was on the day that Israel announced 12 weeks for abortions. 12 weeks later was the football sign involving player number 13, and another stock market close in which again the S&P 500 closed at essentially 3,900. This time, instead of closing 0.11 points above 3,900, it closed 0.11 points below 3,900. And again, this is to indicate adding 13 weeks to get to December 18th and the prophetic signs that occurred on December 18th, of which there are many and they are astounding. And December 18th was the first day of Hanukkah, and the festival of Hanukkah regards the restoration of the temple, and one of the signs that occurred on this date was such a sign involving the Detroit Lions and the famous euthanized mountain lion which as explained points to Isaiah chapter 31 and the Lord coming down to defend his temple and Temple Mount. The Lord coming down like a lion to defend his holy mountain. December 18th is in turn 9 days before the prophetic and related signs that occurred on December 27th that I will explain in a minute. And in turn, December 27th connects to the date that it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran and nuke Damascus, Syria, which will lead to the restoration of the Temple Mount. This 9 days is preceded by an exact 13 weeks to the signs involving the number 13, and this is because God pairs the numbers 9 and 13 together to confirm the signs and connections, which is how God's big picture of signs works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, which is what the Bible says is required and which is what makes it true and not a product of one's imagination, and what makes what is being explained on this channel different and unique than everything else that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs on the internet. The reason for pairing 9 and 13 together is from the Bible. The number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. And so the equation 9 times 13 is symbolism for judgment by the Antichrist on the nation, and 9 times 13 equals 117. And one reason why God pairs 9 and 13, which symbolizes judgment by the Antichrist, and why it equals 117, is that the number 117 reveals the identity of the first Antichrist of the two Antichrists, Pope Francis, as the number 117 symbolizes Rome. 117 AD was the year of the maximum expansion of the Roman Empire. The year 117 AD is synonymous with the history of Rome, and Bible prophecy makes it clear that the Antichrist is from Rome. And one thing that is interesting in context of Israel bombing and nuking Damascus is the statements and speeches that Pope Francis has made regarding nuclear weapons. And for example, Pope Francis visited the Hidden Christians Monument in Nagasaki, Japan, exactly 666 days after UNESCO of the United Nations officially made the Hidden Christians sites in Nagasaki World Heritage Sites. The Antichrist will preside over the Temple Mount after the world makes Jerusalem an international city, the biggest transgression that the nations will do against God as described in Bible prophecy. Also, 9 days is 216 hours, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which in Bible prophecy is symbolism for the Antichrist. And so from the prophetic signs on December 18th, it is 9 days to the signs on December 27th, which in turn connects to the date it is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, which will then lead to the restoration of the temple on the Temple Mount. And again, in Amos 9:11, the Lord says that he will return to rebuild his temple. And the Apostle James quoted this and used the word return, which is the 390th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance. And a big reason why God pairs 9 and 13 together, again, is to hint at 9 times 13 equals 117. And one of the other reasons why, and a big reason why God uses the number 117, is that it hints at 1,170, which is 390 plus 390 plus 390. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And again, the number 390 is symbolism for the return of the Lord to rebuild his temple. And so this is why this 9 days and 13 weeks connection, which hints at 117, which hints at 1,170, which is 3 times 390, the Lord's return. The day before Israel dissolved its Knesset, a report came out how Israel and other Arab nations had secretly met in March to discuss how to cooperate against the threat posed by Iran's missiles and drones. On this same day of the report, June 26th, Iran launched its second Zuljaneh rocket. The relevance of this launch is confirmed through it being a prophetic 110 days after the first Zoljane launch. It is more than a coincidence that this missile launch occurred on the same day that the report came out regarding the secret meeting concerning Iran's missiles. From the date of the report of the Chariots of Fire military drill in Israel, on the same day that the composer of the song Chariots of Fire died, the musician that composed for the album 666. It is exactly 6 + 6 + 6 weeks to the day of the explosions on the surface of the sun. All right, at this point, I've demonstrated a few different ways, a few different trails of signs in which April 26th connects to December 27th. Now I will explain briefly the prophetic signs that occurred on December 27th. But first, I will say that December 27th connects with 144 days to May 20th, the very important date in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. When, for example, the 44-year-old first Jewish leader of Ukraine that was made up of 44 million people made a surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima, the location where the first nuclear bomb was dropped. The number 144,000 is a prominent and very prophetic number in the book of Revelation. Earlier, it was explained the prophetic signs that occurred on September 18th, 2022, which included the exchange between the leaders of Iran and Israel, and the theme of the Holocaust, and this preceded the opening of the UN General Assembly. And also on that day, September 18th, there was the uncanny 3 simultaneous explosions on the surface of the sun. That date, September 18th, is 100 days, which is the equivalent of 144,000 minutes before December 27th. One of the prophetic signs we received on December 27th was that the NASDAQ stock index lost 144 points. And so September 18th connects with 144,000 minutes to December 27th, and the day that the NASDAQ lost 144 points, which in turn connects with 144 days to May 20th, the important date that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th. Here is an email that was composed on January 10th, 2023, that documents how it was predicted that on May 20th, Israel would nuke Damascus, Syria. Instead, on May 20th, the leaders of the G7 nations met for a summit in Hiroshima, Japan, the location where the first nuclear bomb was used in an act of war. As was mentioned, the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. And December 27th was 90 days after Aaron Judge, that's his surname, this Yankees player Aaron Judge, player number 99, tied player 9's home run record, Roger Maris's home run record, on the day that the 9th named storm of the year, Hurricane Ian, hit the 27th state. And the 27th state is because 27 is an emphasis of the number 9. It is 9 + 9 + 9. Hurricane Ian hinted at Iran. If we add a letter R to Ian, we get Iran. The letter R is the 18th letter in the alphabet, and 18 is 9 + 9, and this was the day that player 99 tied player 9's home run record on the day that Ian hit the 27th state, which hints at 9 + 9 + 9. In other words, one of the prophetic reasons for Hurricane Ian was for hinting at Iran. And like how Roman letters are also numerals, so are Hebrew letters, and the numeric value of the name Damascus, Syria in Hebrew is 999. Again, the day that Aaron Judge, player 99, tied player 9's home run record was 90 days before December 27th. And on that day, the NASDAQ lost 144 points, but it was 144.63, and 0.63 hints at 63, which is a multiple of 9, and 6 + 3 = 9. the NASDAQ lost 144 points, 1,440 hours, which is the equivalent of 60 days, after the day that the first committee approved the draft UN resolution that aimed at disarming Israel of its nukes and putting its program under the purview of the UAEA. This is a massive connection. This is extreme judgment. This is the UN ganging up on Israel, which it will do after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria. The bombing of Damascus, Syria will lead to Jews rebuilding the temple on the Temple Mount. And the 1440th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for 70. And this is why 70 days after Israel's prophetic 70th anniversary, 70 years after Israel was reborn in 1948, was the day that a record 1,440 Jews ascended the Temple Mount, and 1,440 is the word for 70, and this was on the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar, exactly 1948 years after the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. The big Israel news on December 27th was the laws that were passed to clear the way for a Netanyahu-led government, and the news of Prime Minister Netanyahu's first major appointment. He appointed former Likud MK Tzachi Hanegbi as the head of the National Security Council. Hanegbi famously said in an interview in October that he predicted that Netanyahu would bomb Iran. It was a big news story at the time. God pointed to this through pointing to this date in order to confirm that Hanegbi will advise Netanyahu when they decide to bomb Iran. This isn't the only date God pointed to that ended up being a date of Israeli Knesset government significance. He also pointed to the date that Netanyahu was out of office on June 13, 2021, which was also known in advance to be a date that God was pointing to, as it was the fourth day of the fourth month in the Hebrew calendar, and it was 44 days after 44 people died in the Crush event, the biggest civil disaster in Israeli history, which was the Crush Stampede on April 30th, 2021. And God also pointed to the first budget that the Knesset passed in 3.5 years on November 4th, 2021. And God also pointed to the dissolving of the parliament and fifth elections in 3.5 years on June 27th, 2022, as was just explained in this video. All of these dates that I just mentioned were predicted in advance. These were dates that it was predicted in advance that there would be a major prophetic sign related to this subject regarding Israel and the conflict with Iran. All of these dates were part of the trail of dates and signs that led to December 27th, 2022. And so just to recap here, from the day that the UN First Committee sent its draft to the General Assembly for a vote stating that Israel must get rid of its nuclear weapons, it is 1,440 hours to the date that the NASDAQ lost 144 points, on the same day that the laws were passed that cleared the way for a Netanyahu-led government and his first appointment, Hanegbi, that predicted that Netanyahu would bomb Iran on December 27th, which is in turn 144 days to May 20th, the day that the G7 leaders met in Hiroshima, which in turn is two sets of 49 days, 49 plus 49 days, to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th. And I will explain the prophetic significance and relevance of this 49 plus 49 days in a minute. It hints at the book of Jeremiah in the Bible, chapter 49, which describes ancient Persia. Again, the first part of this video was an explanation for a few different trails of prophetic signs that connected April 26th, 2022 to December 27th, 2022. And ultimately, these trails of signs are leading to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran and then nuke Damascus, Syria. And that said, from these prophetic signs on April 26th, which is where this video began, these prophetic signs that relate to Israel and its conflict with Iran, these signs on April 26th are 390 days before May 20th, 2023. And the number of 390 days is extremely prophetic. As for one thing, it comes from the extremely prophetic prophecy in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 4, which regards God's timing regarding the nation of Israel. But also, the number 390 symbolizes the return of God, the return of Lord Jesus Christ to Jerusalem in Israel. God has clearly and repeatedly demonstrated this in his big picture of prophetic signs. And the reason why this is the case is that the 390th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for return. The Apostle James used this word when he quoted Amos 9:11 from the Old Testament, which regards the Lord's return to rebuild his temple in Jerusalem. And as was stated, the bombing of Damascus will lead to the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. And so it is astounding that we have this 390 days connection from the prophetic signs on April 26th to May 20th, the date it was predicted that Israel would nuke Damascus, Syria, but turned out to be 2 sets of 49 days, which hints at Jeremiah 49, before it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th. As well, one of the many reasons that May 20th was known ahead of time is that it is 4 times 4 days after May 4th, the date that the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million people nation made a surprise visit to the International Criminal Court. May 4th, 2023 was also a date that it was known ahead of time that God was pointing to. The International Criminal Court was set up for the purpose of conducting court trials for war crimes. And the reason why God pointed ahead of time to May 4th and the visit to the International Criminal Court of the 44-year-old leader of the nation of 44 million people is because after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, the world will condemn Israel for war crimes, and the world will be led by the Antichrist, the 44th president. And so from this surprise visit of the 44-year-old of the 44 million people nation to the International Criminal Court, it is 4 times 4 days to the date that the 44-year-old of the 44 million nation will make a surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima, the location in which the first nuclear bomb was used in an act of war. The bombing of Iran will lead to the nuking of Damascus, Syria, and as I will explain, Damascus is symbolized by the number 444. All right, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to explain this. This is amazing. I'm going to explain, among other things, what happened on May 20th and July 8th. Okay, and so I made this video originally just as a rough sketch for some friends, but I've decided that to just keep it, even though I apologize, it's a pencil diagram and it's a rough sketch, but the explanation is very good. And the signs were fresher in my mind at the time. They were made right after May 20th, and so I'm just going to keep it for convenience sake as well. And I've added some pictures along the way as well to help. But anyway, this will be very, very interesting. Also, so what happened on this day was the Iran missile sign. Iran gave a big presentation to news agencies regarding its updated missile, a new missile, an updated one. And it also included a model, apparently, of the Temple Mount, which is a big thing here because it's, I don't know if other people that are following prophecy are saying the same thing, but it seems logical to me that the bombing of Iran is going to lead to the nuking of Damascus, which will lead to the Jews resuming sacrifices on the Temple Mount. And so also on this, so why is this a major prophetic sign? Why is this important? Well, let's go over here. It's all about Jeremiah 49. Judgment on Elam. Elam was an area of Persia, ancient Persia, and this is where the Bashar nuclear reactor is, the Bashar facility that it's believed that Israel will take out when it attacks Iran. So, but the thing is that, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might. Well, in ancient Persia, the mainstay of their might was their archery. The Persians were known for their archery, and that was the reason for their success. They developed a new strategy, a unique strategy for archery, and they obliterated their enemies when they were on battlegrounds that were flat and large. They didn't do as well in mountainous terrain, and the Greeks picked that up on that. I just read all this, so that's why I'm saying that. If you go here, if I forget to leave a link, archeryhistorian.com, Persian archery, talks about how the main component of the Persian military was the archer. Okay, and what it does is it explains that the unique development of their archery was that they, instead of like previous military strategy, they, instead of having one row of archers behind the guy with the shield, the row of guys with shields, they had 9 archers. So that's 9, right? We have 9 right there. But the reason why we have 9 right here is because this is symbolic of Persia, the archery. And God is using the modern day version of that with Iran's missiles. The big thing about Iran is their missiles and their capability of launching missiles that can perhaps even reach Europe now. And they're constantly having these missile launches and showing off their missiles. And they've got tons of different versions of missiles. They're all about their missiles. But the reason why is because it's symbolic of ancient Persia, which was all about their arrows, their archery. So it's the history repeating, right? And that's why this is a major sign right here, because we're talking about the prophecy in Jeremiah 49 being fulfilled when Israel will take out Iran and their nuclear facilities. Okay, and so part of the historian's description of the Persian archery is that they would launch so many arrows that it would block out the sun. And that's why we have 93 days to the date it is predicted that Israel will take out Iran. As we know, 93 hints at the sun. 93 million miles. So that's amazing. And not only that, it turns out that the date Israel will take out Iran is connected to the date that predicted for the explosion on the surface of the sun, 60 plus 60 plus 60 days. And so just like Japan, which is symbolic for the land of the rising sun and nuclear weapons, it turns out that so is Iran and the bombing of Iran. And that gets us to the second witness on this date, which was the announcement from the U.S. Navy that the ship was discovered off the coast of Okinawa, which was the first, and God uses firsts in his signs. It was the first ship to have been bombed by a kamikaze bomb and sunk due to a kamikaze bomb, the human-guided bombs, which was a big part of World War II and the battle with Japan. So this is a key aspect of the war, and we have this first ship ever to have been bombed with a kamikaze bomb. And so this is bomb symbolism, and we are talking about Japan, which God has been using as nuclear bomb symbolism. And that's why this occurred on this date as a second witness to bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, perhaps even with a nuclear bomb. And so that's amazing. And so the 9, because the archery is the big thing about the Persian archery was the 9 rows of archers, and that confirms the 9 days to this sign right here. And that's another pairing with the 110. And as was explained in the videos, this date IR20 began at sunset on the 16th, and that the sign of the Joseph's tomb was after sunset, and it went into the 17th. And on the 17th, we had the 700,000 images sign of the Titanic, which was 70 months after July 17th, 2017, as was explained. Anyway, the number in the sign was the 101 because of the serial number on the propeller. And so from the 17th, it's 101 days from the Titanic sign, which is confirmation of this. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to explain, and rather than type into an email, is this. This is amazing. So what about May 20th? How does it connect to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran and nuke Damascus? Well, so May 20th was the day of the Preakness race. Well, first of all, it was the day of the Hiroshima sign when Zelensky, the 44-year-old of 44 million, was in Hiroshima, and that was, this date was predicted many months back in early January. So, but this Preakness race was a race around a track, and as we know, God has demonstrated that races around a track are symbolic of the circuit that the Hebrews would do around the walls of Jericho. And there are 3 sets of 7, including a 7 times over 7 days. And on the 7th day, 7 priests, 7 trumpets. It's also a 7 times 7 symbolism. And that's why on this, in this sign, we had the blazing sevens horse, which was hinting at, of course, the prophecy, the most important prophecy, the 77s prophecy, Daniel chapter 9. That's why this horse was number 7, and the final odds was 4.9, which hints at 490, because that's what 77s are, 490. And but the thing is that this horse placed number 2, and this is blazing. And that's what's going to be happening here. Iran will be on fire here. It'll be a blaze. It'll be fire judgment. It's blazing sevens, horse number 7, and he's number 2, which hints at 2 sets of 7 times 7 days, 49 days, which hints at Jeremiah 49, as does, by the way, the final odds of 490 with the blazing sevens. And this mid-date here is confirmed as a step. It connects with 69 weeks, Daniel chapter 9 again, to the day that Iran launched the missiles at Iraq next to the consulate of the U.S. and intended to target Israeli targets, which in turn was 69 weeks after the FBI and the Moldovan authorities announced their breakup of smuggling of uranium out of Moldova. Anyway, so this date is confirmed, and this is amazing. These 2 sets of 49 days, which hints at Jeremiah 49. And what's also astounding confirmation of this is the name of the jockey is Irad Ortiz Jr., and the trainer is Chad C. Brown. But if we take the first 3 letters and the last letter, we get Iran. I mean, Irad is enough of a hint at Iran, in my opinion, but we have Iran there too. And so that's amazing. Then we have this 14 weeks exactly, but it was also 14 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. And that's astounding because it was the first ever time 2 horses that were from Japan raced, which is nuclear bomb symbolism. So the 14 days connects, and then 14 weeks connects. But this is confirmed. This 14 is confirmed because of this. We had the first, second, and third horse. The first horse was placed 8. The second horse was the first placed horse was number 8. The second placed horse was number 3. And the third placed horse was number 14. This gave us 3 and 14, as we know, which hinted at pi. But also, we have another pi because the third placed horse was number 14. So there's 2 pies there, which then therefore focus in on the 14. That's amazing. That's, in other words, the reason for this, really. I forget the other reasons. They were explained in the other videos and email, I'm sure. But that confirms this 14 days to the Preakness race, which is 14 weeks exactly to the day Iran will bomb with nuclear bombs, even maybe the nuclear facilities. Again, the 2 Japanese horses. So that's amazing. Now, what else? Oh, so the thing is, it's 660 days, which is Antichrist symbolism, 66th book of the Bible, Revelation. And also it hints at 666. And also 66 is the 11th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 11th row is 66. And that's also what's hinted at with the 101 days, because the Titanic, which is what this number 101 is related to, is a sign from God that points to the Mayflower's crossing of the Atlantic, which took 66 days. And it was 101 passengers that arrived and anchored off the coast of Massachusetts. And so that's why we have this 101 days and this 66 number days both connecting to August 26th. Now, obviously, there's way more to this, and this isn't really even the subject of this video, but that's how God's big picture of signs and patterns works. It's an interconnected web. And so to try to explain one aspect of the web is extremely difficult, because you end up pulling the entire web at the same time. And so anyway, I just thought I'd point that out too. We have the 2 connections that are related to each other ending up on August 26th. And the reason why that's relevant too is because this is exactly 42 weeks after, 42 years after the beginning of the 444-day Iranian hostage crisis. Damascus is symbolized by 444. And that hints at, of course, the Antichrist, 42 months. But also on this date here is the day that Israel, for the first time in 3.5 years, passed a budget. 3.5 years, 42 months. All right, so what about this midpoint here, this July 8th date? This video was originally recorded a couple of months, in May. It was in mid-May that this video was recorded, right after May 20th. And this date was known ahead of time to be a date that God was pointing to. As we can see here, it is the mid-date of this very important 2 sets of 49 days connection to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And again, 49 hints at Jeremiah 49, which is a prophecy that is describing this breaking of the bow of Elam. Anyway, so what happened on this July 8th date is the question, and it is amazing, and it also confirms everything, like every other date that was known ahead of time. And on this date was the day that the first Jewish leader of Ukraine that turned 44 years old right before the war began, when there was an exodus, as an exodus in the Bible, of Ukrainians of a country that was made up of 44 million people, which, as I mentioned earlier, is because God is using all of this as symbolism for the Antichrist that will also persecute Jews in Judea, that will flee Judea, as described in Bible prophecy, the 44th president. Anyway, on this day, speaking of the number 44, was, actually I'm jumping ahead, but one of the signs on this date was the player number 44 for the Cincinnati Reds. And that's relevant, and I don't want to get off onto a tangent here, as I've mentioned before. It's extremely difficult to explain God's big picture of signs, because you just end up going off into infinity, because it's an interconnected web. But the Cincinnati Reds is important because of the 1919 Black Sox, the Black Sox scandal, the Chicago White Sox in 1919, and the cheating scandal, which involves cheating, as you know, which is how the 44th president will become the president again. And anyway, that scandal led to the first commissioner of baseball, which is symbolism for the Antichrist, because this commissioner, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, is his name. Mountain hints at high place. The name Bama in Hebrew means high place, which is a euphemism in the Bible where Jews would conduct religious worship to the false gods. Anyway, so I'm getting off onto a tangent as I thought I would, and so I'm going to rein this back in here. Cincinnati Reds, fine, good enough. So anyway, this player for the Cincinnati Reds, player number 44, he did this amazing play on this day where he stole all of the bases. He hit a single to first and then proceeded to steal successively each base. It was a national sports news story, and God is using this player also, and so and recently in relation to this prophetic sign by this player. His name is Eli, which hints at Elias, Spanish for because he's Spanish. His name is Spanish. It is, I'm sure, a short form or a derivative of Elias in Spanish, which is Spanish for Elijah. And another recent sign God used, and is actually tied to this guy Eli, is the Elias sign in the All-Star game, which hinted at the days of Elijah. So I'm getting off onto a tangent again. So anyway, the point is that the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million people, also on this same day, was reported the big news story of him being on Snake Island on the 500th day of the Russia-Ukraine war. 500 days since the war began, when he was 44 years old and the nation was made up of 44 million people. 500 because in Strong's Concordance in the Greek, the 500th word is Antichrist. And also this was the day of the no-hitter, the 9th no-hitter for the Tigers, the Detroit Tigers, and it was a combined no-hitter, and the last inning was pitched by player number 55, but to explain the relevance of that would be to go off onto another tangent. So that's enough. So anyway, the big thing here, though, is, as I have explained earlier in this video, is that God is using this leader, the first Jewish leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, the 44-year-old of 44 million people, to hint at the 44th president Antichrist. And, well, let's see. This date here, for example, as I mentioned earlier, was 4 times 4 days. Well, so, okay, first of all, the midpoint here is of this major news story regarding the surprise visit location of Zelensky, which was Snake Island. And that was a big deal because Snake Island was the symbolic beginning of the war, which is another prophetic sign, which would be to explain, to go off onto another tangent. But the Moskva, the pride of the Russian fleet, took Snake Island, and the reason for Snake Island is because it hints at the snake bite, which was developed in Ukraine in the bioweapons laboratories, U.S. funded. Anyway, that's another tangent. So anyway, Snake Island, and that's what's being symbolized with the Russia-Ukraine war, by the way. It's a big thing in terms of identifying the mark of the Antichrist, which is the snake bite, the thing. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so that's why Snake Island, because the snake bite is snake venom. The SPIKEPROTEIN is synthesized snake venom. Okay, so anyway, 500th day, and that's a surprise visit of Zelensky to Snake Island. And here on May 20th, that was again the surprise visit of Zelensky to the G7 summit in Hiroshima. And that in turn was 4 times 4 days after Zelensky's surprise visit to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, on May 4th. And so you get the idea. We have this string of 3 instances of these prophetic signs involving the surprise visit of the 44-year-old leader of 44 million, but he is the first Jewish leader of Ukraine. And it is the 500th day of war we are talking about here. And Hiroshima hints at nuclear war. And the ICC hints at the coming condemnation. The court is set up for war crimes, and it is also hinting at the upcoming condemnation of Israel for nuking Damascus and bombing Iran. And so that's why these 3 surprise visits involving war symbolism of the first Jewish leader of Ukraine is relevant to the trail connecting to the date it is predicted that war will begin with the Jewish nation of Israel on August 26th. All right, now I'm just going to briefly read a couple of notes that I made to some friends regarding the prophetic signs on July 8th. You may recall that July 8th, 2023 is the midpoint of the 2 sets of 7 days, 49 days, between the Blazing Sevens Preakness, not Belmont, prophetic sign, and Zelensky, the 44-year-old leader, in Hiroshima signs, and the predicted bombing of Iran, okay, the midpoint, Jeremiah chapter 49. July 8th, 2023 ended up being the date of Zelensky 500th, G500 Antichrist, the word as I explained, day of the war on Snake Island sign. This was 44 days after May 25th and the discovery of the first ship sunk by a kamikaze bomb and Iran's demonstration of a new missile, Jeremiah 49 signs. In other words, July 8th was predicted ahead of time, and once again, the analysis was correct. Wow. Why Zelensky? Why is he the sign in the midpoint or at the midpoint on the 500th day of the war? Because he is the first Jewish president of Ukraine. This Jew hints at Israel at war. The exodus from his 44 million people nation when he was 44 hints at the Jews that will flee Judea because of the 44th president Antichrist. Amazing. It's clearer now. The rest of this video was recorded before April 26th. I'm not going to edit the rest of this video. Instead, this video will provide the explanation for how God was pointing to April 26th, and what I have just said in this explanation in the introduction of this video explains how April 26th was for the purpose of pointing to May 17th and June 27th, 2022. In other words, on April 26th, God was not finished with this particular trail of signs in his big picture of signs and this story that he is telling. April 26th was a very important step and important piece of the puzzle, and to understand this story, it is essential for us to learn how God was pointing to April 26th. This will be the subject of the rest of this video. And before we begin the rest of this video that was recorded before April 26th, 2022, at the beginning of this video, I mentioned one of the prophetic signs, the 44-year-old that took 4 hostages at the synagogue in Texas on January 15th, 2022. That date is exactly 70 weeks before the prophetic signs that occurred on May 20th, which were a step in the trail of signs leading to the date that it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th. Damascus is symbolized by the number 444. 70 weeks comes from the most central prophecy in the Bible in Daniel chapter 9, which is titled the 70 Weeks Prophecy. The archangel Gabriel appeared to Daniel and gave him a prophecy that was the 70 weeks prophecy. And this is why in God's true big picture of signs, he frequently uses 70 weeks connections to connect relevant prophetic signs. In other words, this 70 weeks connection from this hostage taking, which I will talk more about in a minute, is more profound confirmation that God is pointing to May 20th, 2023. Now, what I'm going to do is play a short clip here that explains why Damascus is symbolized by 444. And again, this is the reason for the 70 weeks exact connection between the predicted nuking of Damascus and the 44-year-old that took 4 hostages. And the number 444 symbolizes Damascus. Now, that is a little bit of a Bible study, but the number 4, we need to go into it. So the thing about Damascus is that it, in the Bible, is symbolism for the world. And this is also confirmed practically as well because it is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. So it is symbolism for the world in the Bible too. The examples of Damascus in the Bible are in context of that symbolism. But we don't want to get into the Bible study. If you really are interested in that and learning more, you can look that up for yourself quite easily. Okay, but let's explain a little bit why Damascus is symbolized by 444. By the way, when Damascus is completely destroyed with a nuclear bomb, which, by the way, will fulfill Isaiah chapter 17, it will symbolize judgment on the world. That's the beginning, if you will, of the chaos of the end times. It's beginning of judgment on the world, which will begin a sort of symbolic beginning, if you will, with the complete destruction from a nuclear bomb of Damascus, which symbolizes the world. E.W. Bullinger wrote, and he is a gentleman that in the early 20th century, he wrote a book explaining he's like the authority, if you will, on prophetic numbers in the Bible. And the Bible is filled with numbers which have symbolic prophetic meaning. God uses numbers. And also, this is how he develops his big picture of signs. It's the same. It parallels the Bible. God uses in his signs numbers from the Bible. And this being an example. And that's why I'm explaining it. And why Damascus symbolizes the world and why 444 is symbolic of that. Another thing, too, is that the 444th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for man. And E.W. Bullinger, the authority, if you will, on this sort of subject, he wrote that the number 4 is basically, he didn't write this, I'm not quoting him, is God's creative works. I'll quote right now, though. Bullinger said, quote, "It is the number of things that have a beginning of things that are made and of material things and matter itself. It is the number of material completeness. Hence it is the world number and especially the city number," unquote. Bullinger then cited some examples on 4 in scripture and experience. 4 great elements, earth, air, fire, and water. 4 regions of the earth, north, south, east, and west. 4 divisions of the day, morning, noon, evening, and midnight. And 4 seasons of the year, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Ed Vallow in Bible Mathematics said, quote, "The world in which men lived and worked and died was conveniently symbolized by 4, a number of further divisibility. 4 stands for weakness found in the world and man. In common parlance, we speak of the 4 corners of the earth and the 4 points of the compass. Important is the indirect meaning of trial, testing, and experience, derived from the fact that the earth is the scene of man's testing. 4 is the number of creation and marks creative works. It is the signature of the world. Also, R.T. Nash in Spiritual Arithmetic explained that the Greek word therizin means reap, and the value of 444 is taken from Revelation 14:15, wherein the hour had come for an angel to put his sickle and reap the harvest of the earth. I take this as the reason why the Antichrist, the second one, is the 44th president. The reason why the first Antichrist and his number is 666 is because that's the day of the creation of man, the 6th day of creation. And so 666 is an emphasis of that. Well, what I just explained is the reason for the emphasis of 444 and the 44th president, and why 444 is the number for Damascus. The Hebrew gematria of Damascus, Syria is 999. And again, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, as I mentioned earlier. All right, the information in the rest of this video will be amazing. And as was mentioned, it was originally produced before April 26th, 2022. In some cases, even much before that. But the thing is, today is July 22nd, and we now know that Israel will bomb Iran on August 26th, 2023. Today is July 22nd, 2023. Before we begin with what I have already recorded before April 26th, 2022, explaining the trail of signs leading to April 26th, which is a must watch or listen to the information, I just want to get in here that this date here, the day of the 4 hostages by the 44-year-old Pakistani, this date here is exactly 84 weeks before August 26th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. 84 weeks is relevant because in this context, well, it's relevant for a number of reasons, but I'm just going to say right here that the Antichrist, the 44th president, hence the 4 hostages and that were taken by the 44-year-old, the Antichrist was born on the date 8/4, August 4th, and he will be the 48th president after he will replace Kamala Harris after it is predicted that she will die in a plane crash on October 17th. And so 84 also hints at 48. Also on this day, as I will explain in this video, there was the only ever perfect game in the NFL played by the Buffalo Bills on the day of the volcano, and God was using buffalo to hint at the bison at the Yellowstone volcano, but that is another subject. But anyway, on this day, this quarterback that threw the only ever in NFL history perfect game, which means that on every drive they scored a touchdown. They never didn't score. Anyway, the quarterback rushed 6 times for 66 yards. So that was more Antichrist symbolism, in other words. And the point being is that that's just more confirmation for adding the 84 weeks, which is Antichrist symbolism. This 84 weeks is also 19 months and 1 day, which hints at the number 191, which is a number that God uses in his signs to symbolize 9/11. God pairs 9s and 1s together as well to signify judgment and the execution of judgment and the promised judgment and punishment after disobedience as described in Deuteronomy chapter 28. So anyway, and there is a case to be made that the big eruption occurred at 9 minutes after 11 p.m. East Coast time. This is, by the way, is the volcano in the Pacific Ocean, the biggest eruption in the Pacific. So, okay. And also, this date here, which was when, this is extremely prophetic. There's so much to be said about it. It is also extremely Antichrist, and I will explain that. But it was, for example, the day that the Dodgers pitcher number 44 was pulled too early from the game in the World Series, blowing the 4-0 lead, which Trump tweeted, God's trumpet tweeted his disapproval of, and also mentioned the 4-0 blown lead. It was exactly 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem sign, and 444 days after the Revelation chapter 12 sign was fulfilled in the night sky on September 23rd, 2017, and I'll explain more. But also it was the day that 4 police officers were wounded in the synagogue shooting, the Jewish synagogue shooting, hence the tie to Israel and the bombing of Iran. This was in Squirrel Hill. The pitcher's name was Rich Hill. The media kept saying that there was the wealthy, rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Okay, so anyway, this date here is exactly 252 weeks before August 26th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. 252 weeks exactly is astounding because that hints at 2,520, which is a number in Bible prophecy, in the most central prophecy in the Bible regarding the period of the Antichrist and the end times, regarding Israel and the Antichrist furthermore, in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And so that's why this is 252 weeks exactly. All right, now what is even more amazing, because it confirms this, is this synagogue shooting here, which was when 4 people were shot in the Poway, California synagogue shooting. And I'll explain much more about all of this. There's so much more. The details are what makes it amazing, and there's more details. But I just want to get out of the way beforehand, because this won't be mentioned later. This date here, which was April 27th, 2019, this date here is exactly 226 weeks before August 26th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. 226 weeks exactly is also astounding because the 226th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word for, or the Hebrew word that means prophetic sign. In other words, this prophetic sign is a sign that confirms with 226 weeks that hints at prophetic sign to the date that Israel will bomb Iran, which will begin essentially the end times in a way. I mean, we're already in the end times, and that's another subject in itself. And I explain that so many other times in the videos, so I don't need to explain it here. However, there will be a massive escalation of the end times, and it'll really get going when Israel will bomb Iran. And that's why this is an astounding connection, this exact 226 weeks here. All right, it gets even more amazing because we have more confirmation here, because as you can see, these two synagogue shootings connected with each other, in fact, with exactly 6 months, but I'll explain more the relevance of that later in the video. But as you can see here, this also connects to this sign here in Squirrel Hill. This sign here was in Squirrel Hill. This was the bridge collapse when coincidentally Joe Biden just happened to be in Pittsburgh that same morning to deliver a big speech regarding his infrastructure package, and then the bridge collapsed and he actually visited it because it happened right when he was there. Anyway, there were 4 people injured, and there's much more to this. But anyway, the point is that this was a Squirrel Hill Pittsburgh sign that tied to this Squirrel Hill shooting, which I will explain more. But in other words, this was a Jewish sign here too, and it was an Israel sign. And what confirms that is that this date here is exactly 160.00% of a year. God uses frequently the number 16 to hint at 4 times 4, which hints at 44, and the 44th president. And that's why, for example, we have these connections to the 4 shot and the 4s over here, and the 4 injured on this date here, which connects with the 4 times 40.00% of a year to August 26th. And we have this 44 days connection from here too. So in other words, it's all confirmed, and that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, and that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. Now, this date here in the diagram, which I will explain, with the day the GOAT, greatest of all time football, announced a return for a 23rd season at 44 years old, which was the same day that the 44-year-old GOAT Antichrist announced that he had the CVD disease, and this was 23 days before he returned to the White House. But anyway, this was also the day of the prophetic explosions in Iraq by the Iranian missiles that targeted Israelis, and on and on. So, but anyway, I'll explain more later, but it again connects with 44 days and 44 days on each side. But the point, what I wanted to say and get out of the way here, because it won't be explained later, is that this date here is 531 days before August 26th, 2023, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. 531 days is extremely prophetic, but in context and why it is relevant here is that it is the number of days in a blood moon lunar eclipse tetrad. And throughout history, God has used blood moon lunar eclipse tetrads in relation to his movement with Israel in history, including, for example, the tetrad that occurred at the time of the restoration of Israel around 1948 and 1967, the two most important years. And so if you don't know what a blood moon tetrad is, it's very simple to find out. But the point is that between the first and last of the 4 blood moon tetrads is 531 days. And again, this is relevant to Israel. And from this Israel sign here involving explosions, we have 531 days to the date it is predicted that there will be explosions in Iran caused by Israel. And so that is astounding. And we'll leave it at that. There's more to be said about the number 531, but I've explained it in other videos. Well, I'll just quickly add that the blood moon lunar eclipse tetrad in 2014 and 2015, the big prophetic date of it was the 3rd out of the 4. There was also a earthquake tetrad, which were 4 earthquakes in the world that were 7.0 or greater, spaced at 177 days. And that is the number of days in between each blood moon and a blood moon tetrad. And so that's why this was an earthquake tetrad. Now, all of the blood moons of the 4 were prophetic, especially the 1st, the 3rd, and the 4th. But that's another subject. But the 3rd of, well, arguably all 4 of the earthquake tetrads were prophetic too. But the 3rd and the 4th one especially, and the 3rd one especially, because that was the day, that was July 17th, and that date, 7/17, hints at the 177 days in between the earthquakes in the earthquake tetrad and the blood moons. But so the date 7/17 in 2017, and it was 7/17 in 2017, by the way. There's so much to be said about this, and I can't explain it here all, but that was the day after exactly 49 biblical years after Israel decreed to rebuild Jerusalem. And so anyway, that just follows the most central prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, and I explained it in other videos. What I wanted to say, though, is that tetrad is indicative of how the number of days between the blood moons are important, and it is 177. And so 531 days is made up of 3 sets of 177. Well, God emphasizes a number 3 times to emphasize its symbolic meaning. And I just explained a bit about the prophetic or symbolic meaning of 177, which occurs 3 times in 531. Well, 177 is also 3 times 59. And 59 is the 17th prime number. And the number 17 is the 7th prime number. And so there you have the 7 and 17 again. And so it all makes it an emphasis of the number 7, if you will. It's abstract, but symbolically it is, in other words, 3 sets of 7. And that is important because God uses 3 sets of 7 as symbolism for judgment on a nation and people, because there were 3 sets of 7 in the account of Joshua, in the book of Joshua, when the Hebrews marched around the walls of security of Jericho 7 times, once per day for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, 7 times, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. And then the walls of security of ancient Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. It was a symbolic 3 sets of 7, and there are other 3 sets of 7 as well. In fact, there are 3 sets of 7 in the account of judgment in Noah's flood. And anyway, so that's also what 531 symbolizes. And so we have we have this connection which is embedded in it, a symbolic 3 sets of 7 to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran, which will be the collapse of Iran's security, but also the collapse of Israel and Syria's security and world security after the first nuclear bomb will be used, when Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, which incidentally will fulfill Isaiah chapter 17. Now, one last thing, this date here, I explained earlier in this video, December 27th, 2022. This was the day that Netanyahu regained power and made his first pick for his cabinet, which was Hanegbi. And as you will recall, this Hanegbi guy was in the news shortly before this. Well, a few months before this, before the election, and he predicted that if Netanyahu were to be elected, he would bomb Iran. Anyway, I explained this earlier. And going forward, this will, be thought of as the date that Israel will bomb Iran, and that's because God was pointing to this date, and it couldn't possibly have been known. At least, I don't think it was. No. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. No, I probably did realize before this date that it wouldn't be the date, but when this video was made anyway. The point is that this date here is another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran. And I explained earlier some of the trails going forward from this date that go to, May 20th, for example, as I explained. But I don't recall if I explained or not, but this date here is exactly 36 weeks to August 26th, the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. That's amazing because 36 weeks hints at, the number 36, first of all, 36 weeks is also 252 days. And as I explained earlier, which was it? I think it was this date was exactly 252 weeks, right? And that's because, again, it hints at 2,520 days, the number of days regarding the Antichrist and Israel in the end times in the most central prophecy. All right, so that's what the 250 days here hints at, just like 252 weeks hints at. But it's also 36 weeks exactly, and the number 36 God uses as symbolism for 666. A number from Bible prophecy that symbolizes the Antichrist. And that is because 36 hints at 3 sixes, 36, but also 36 is 6 times 6, and also 36 is 2 times 18, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and also the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. And so you get the idea. In other words, this date here is connecting with Antichrist symbolism big time to the date it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And that is relevant because out of this event will rise the Antichrist that will come in the name of peace, which is described in Bible prophecy. And people will love him, but he'll also be persecuting Jews in Judea and involved heavily in Israel. And so that's why that's relevant too. Okay, this is a truly profound video. The information you are looking at in this diagram is truly profound. I will now start explaining how all of this is leading to the day that Israel will destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program when it drops nuclear bombs on Iran, or one nuclear bomb. The first time a nuclear bomb will be used in an act of war since World War II. But let's begin with the earliest date here, which is April 11th, 2012. This was the day of what scientists called the birth pains of a new tectonic plate. When asked for the signs of his return by his disciples, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. In other words, this was an end times sign. It was the first time in recorded history in which there were two 8-point-something magnitude earthquakes on the same day. And so there were two separate earthquakes, each of them greater than 8 magnitude, that occurred off the shore of Indonesia in the Indian Ocean. And God uses the country Indonesia, which is made up of 34 provinces, in which the 44th president grew up for 4 years, to point to Isaiah chapter 34, which is the chapter in the Bible regarding judgment on the nations, which will come through the Antichrist, who entered politics at the age of 34, and on, as explained in other videos. The number 9 from the Bible is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as the number 9 from the Bible symbolizes judgment. 9 years connections are extremely prophetic. They are how God connects many of the signs from around this time frame to more recent signs, including this one, which was the explosion and blackout at the Natanz nuclear facility, which is where the Iranians are developing their nuclear weapons program. It's where they are enriching uranium, and it's the center of their program, and it's in rural Iran in the wilderness. No doubt Natanz will be attacked on April 26th, coming up soon. Now, these two dates were April 11th. God has demonstrated through other signs that the date April 11th was the day that Jesus Christ was crucified. For one thing, the two comets of 1997 and 96, the Hyakutake and Hale-Bopp, they crossed over, their paths of these comets crossed over each other over the star Algol, which in ancient Hebrew astrology and ancient astrology was the star that symbolized Satan and evil. And so their paths crossed each other perpendicular to each other, and they formed a cross. And it was over the star Algol. And it was Satan that had Jesus crucified. So, and as a result, Jesus defeated Satan, the ruler of this world that had a ransom over us through death. Jesus defeated death on the cross through his resurrection. Many Christians mistakenly believe that Jesus' death somehow satisfied the angry wrath of God, but this isn't what the Bible says, and neither is it what the early Christians in the 1st and 2nd centuries believed, the early church fathers and their writings. And Jesus' death was the ransom paid to Satan, the ruler of this world, and because of this and the defeat of death, we are now free to follow Jesus instead of Satan, if we choose to. The paths of these two comets crossed over each other, perpendicular to each other, exactly 1 year apart in 1996 and 1997 on the date April 11th. And they crossed over Algol, the star Algol. And the reason for the two earthquakes that were 8-point magnitude or greater is because this symbolizes Jesus. The numeric value in Greek gematria for the name Jesus in Greek is 888. Greek letters, like Roman letters, are also numbers, and the numeric value of the name Jesus in Greek, which is the language the New Testament was written in, is 888. And it also, the number 8 symbolizes a new beginning, which is Jesus. And so that's why it connects with these 2 earthquakes, with the birth pains of the new tectonic plate. So this is one way that God has demonstrated through these signs on April 11th that this was in fact the date that Jesus was crucified. Also, just interesting that the Bereshit moonlander crashed on the moon on April 11th, and that was also a second coming sign of Lord Jesus Christ. The moon symbolizes Christ, and that's explained if you'd like to learn about that. The prophetic signs involving the Bereshit moonlander, that's explained in the Bereshit moonlander prophecy video on this channel. Okay, now, as I said, Jesus used the metaphor of birth pains when asked for the signs to look for of his return, and he used this metaphor in context of earthquake signs. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And so this is why God uses 40 weeks connections frequently. They are extremely prophetic and relevant, especially when they are connecting earthquakes, earthquake signs. And so we have this 40 weeks connection in this trail of signs. Doesn't connect exactly to it, but nonetheless, it's right there with the 9 years before this. An explosion is somewhat of an earthquake. You know, it shakes the ground, if you will. But also, it connects to this, which is also kind of symbolic of an earthquake, which was the biggest volcanic eruption. It was called the once in 1,000 years eruption. And this eruption here, well, connects with this 40 weeks. So that's confirmation of that, if you will. This eruption, okay, let's get into this. It occurred almost 4 weeks after the eruptions began. In other words, the eruption that occurred on this date that everyone is familiar with, January 15th, 2022, which was, by the way, this is the Pacific Ocean eruption, the new volcano that has risen above the, it was an undersea volcano, and I think it's called Hunga Tonga, and it occurred, the climax of the eruption occurred on this date, which was almost 4 weeks after the eruptions began. This was the same day as the 4 hostages in the synagogue in Texas. This was the day that the terrorist took 4 hostages, and so arguably this 4 weeks is a confirmation of the 4 hostages, but I'll get into more confirmations of this in a minute. This number 4 in the 4 hostages. This was also the day Antichrist symbolism is contained in this date, and this is because the Patriots, the New England Patriots, played the Buffalo Bills, and this was the last playoff game of the Patriots before the end of times tribulation gets going. And the New England Patriots, as explained in other videos, is the most important sports team in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. It symbolizes America, the spiritual founding of America in New England, and on and on. They won the Super Bowl right after 9/11, and on and on. Well, anyway, in this game, they were defeated, which is judgment warning for America. They were defeated by the Bills, and this was the first ever perfect offensive game ever played. Every single play the Bills did was for positive yardage. They didn't lose any yards on any play, and they never didn't convert on a 3rd down except at the very end of the game when they kneeled to end the game, to let the time of the clock run out. And so this was the first ever perfect game, which is quite something. And that is just confirmation of the prophetic significance of this game, which again is judgment warning on America. In this game, the quarterback rushed for 6 times with a total of 66 yards, which gives us 666 symbolism. Making this an Antichrist symbolism sign, it is just amazing. Now, the thing is, this game and this volcanic eruption, the climax of it, occurred exactly 36 weeks before the day that it is predicted that the world's volcanoes will erupt, including Yellowstone. 36 weeks because God uses 36 weeks because the number 36 symbolizes 666, which is stunning confirmation. In other words, the Yellowstone will erupt on September 24th, and this connection wasn't how that date was originally discovered, but it is amazing confirmation because, again, this game contained 666, and it's exactly 36 weeks before the volcano will erupt. Now, the reason for the bills, and this was learned also before this game, God uses the buffalo bills and buffalo signs also. There are other buffalo signs. The buffalo bills. Bills, by the way, if you don't know, is the name for a male buffalo. The reason is because God's using buffaloes to point to Yellowstone because of the bison that reside in Yellowstone National Park. That's explained in other videos, but that's the reason for this, and that's why this is stunning confirmation. Now, how does 36 weeks symbolize 666? Well, it is 6 times 6, 36, but also 36 is 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36 equals 666. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And so again, 36 weeks exactly from this 666 symbolism game from the volcano eruption to the volcano eruption, which will really bring in the tribulation end times period. Okay, that'll be explained more in upcoming videos, but I'll just say this. The volcano erupted also at 11:09 p.m., the climax of it, this volcanic eruption, 11:09 p.m., the day before Washington time, on the 14th, Washington, D.C. time. And this is judgment on America. The focus of God's end times signs is America because it's not me that is America-centric. It is God. America is God's Gentile nation. There are only 2 nations that were founded not on language or ethnicity or geography or ideology, but a relationship with God, Israel and America. Anyway, so that's relevant. That's the reason why that's relevant. And from that date, it is 8 months and 11 days to the day that the volcano will erupt, Yellowstone will erupt. And so 8 months and 11 days points to Revelation chapter 8, verse 11, which is the verse in the Bible prophecy talking about the volcano, talking about the asteroids that will hit, which will cause the eruptions of volcanoes around the world, including Yellowstone. Okay? And that's the passage that talks about wormwood, which is talking about the asteroid that will hit Earth. One of the asteroids is described as being a mountain, etc. Okay, so that'll be explained in other videos more adequately. But this was 888 days. Speaking of this 888, two earthquakes that were 8.0 or greater. The day that the Bills lost in the volcano eruption, that points to the Yellowstone volcano. Well, it was 888 days after the prophetic sign on the date 8/11, August 11th in 2019, in which the prophetic sign was 11,000 birds had mysteriously died in this national wildlife area in southern Montana, just north of the border, just beside Yellowstone National Park, just the border of Wyoming. And that location is situated directly on top of the lava plume of Yellowstone volcano. And the birds died and caused poisoning in the water. And Revelation chapter 8, verse 11 talks about that wormwood poisoning the earth's fresh water. Many of the birds were killed by a freak hailstorm, and then other birds were killed by the poisoned water. But the hailstorm was also symbolism for the asteroids that will hit Earth and cause the wormwood poisoning of water. And it was 11,000, and the number 11 is symbolism from the Bible for the execution of judgment, and this was on the date August 11th. And also in this Revelation chapter 8, hail is mentioned. After the first trumpet was blown, the hail and fire mixed with blood fell on the earth, which is symbolism for the coming death, and the fire from the sky, which would be the asteroids. And arguably, this could be hinting at birds that will be killed in the sky, along with people in planes. We live in an age where many people travel by plane on a daily basis, and so there would be blood in the sky if this were to happen, if there were this shower of asteroids along with these bigger asteroids that are also described in Revelation chapter 8. Also, chapter 8 also does mention a third of the living creatures dying. It talks about living creatures anyway. It's in context of all of this. And I'll just read the part about the poisoned water. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood. And by the way, wormwood means poisoned water. Wormwood is the name of a type of plant which is bitter. Bitter water is what poisoned water was described as. If you had a well and it was bitter, it was poisoned. It was not drinkable. It was toxic, which is why wormwood in this chapter is actually symbolism for poisoned water. And it goes on, a third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. Now, how is a third of the world's water going to become bitter due to an asteroid? Well, it's because the asteroid will cause the eruption of Yellowstone, which is why this prophetic sign of this 11,000 birds that died due to poisoned water and hail occurred right on top of the plume of the Yellowstone volcano. The world's volcanoes are going to erupt, spewing ash around the world, which will fall and poison and make the waters bitter. Okay, so that was also a prophetic date. It was the 9th of Av, and that'll be explained more in other videos too. Moving on. Okay, so the number 13 is Antichrist symbolism. From the Bible, it symbolizes the Antichrist. Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month, and the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. 13 days after this was this day here in which this bridge collapsed, this 50-year-old bridge in Pittsburgh, right beside Squirrel Hill neighborhood. The neighborhood named Squirrel Hill, and this bridge collapsed coincidentally, not coincidentally, it was designed by God, on the day that Joe Biden was in Pittsburgh to talk about and promote his plan for his infrastructure bill. And infrastructure bills are all about repairing bridges. Okay, so that was amazing. Biden actually visited the bridge collapse after it had collapsed in the early morning. It's astounding. Now, there were 4 people that were injured that had to be taken to hospital. And that's confirmation of this 13 days connection to the 4 hostages. But the reason for this is astounding. Okay, so it was 4 injured that went to hospital because of the collapsed bridge next to Squirrel Hill. And this was exactly 170 weeks after the synagogue shooting in Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, in which 4 police officers were wounded. Absolutely astounding, okay? And so the number 17 is also a number that symbolizes the Antichrist, and it symbolizes the Antichrist that will be vanquished at the return of Lord Jesus Christ at the second coming on the Day of Atonement in 2024. And that it will be in 2024 is confirmed through this prediction. In other words, the reason for God giving me a voice through this prediction is to confirm that the second coming is in 2024. Make no mistake, that is the purpose of this video and this channel. And if it isn't appreciated, you've missed the whole point of this video and this channel. And God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Because the main conclusions of his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, are inextricably tied to each other. They are, in fact, all one and the same conclusion. Because God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is an interconnected web. One conclusion would not have been possible without the confirmations derived from that conclusion that support the other conclusion. Hopefully I've described that well enough. And so anyway, the reason the day number 17 symbolizes the Day of Atonement is because the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month in the Hebrew calendar. Also, in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is described using a metaphor of a beast which has 7 heads and 10 horns, for which the number 17 also symbolizes. And so this isn't the only connection of 170 weeks exactly, but it's also confirmed with the fact that 170 weeks is exactly also 1,190 days, which hints at 9/11, the biggest judgment warning sign. Okay, a main theme in God's signs, in other words. So, and that is confirmed through that. The relevance of this is confirmed in the other 170 weeks connection, which I explain in the Seinfeld prophecy videos. Okay, so on this same day of the synagogue shooting in Rich Squirrel Hill, in which 4 police officers were wounded, and the media spoke about it and referred to it as the Rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Literally, they did that. They always referred to it as the rich, wealthy suburb of Pittsburgh, the Rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood. And this is because on this day, Dodgers pitcher Rich Hill, his name is Rich Hill, on the same day as the Squirrel Hill shooting. And his jersey number is 44, which ties into the 4 police officers. This was the day of the World Series in 2018 when Dodgers manager prematurely pulled the Dodgers pitcher Rich Hill too early from the game, blowing and which ended up blowing the 4-0 lead the Dodgers had. And President Trump, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his signs, tweeted his disapproval about this. In other words, the tweet was a trumpeting of the confirmation of the prophetic significance of this sign. And so it was and he tweeted in the sign the pitcher and the 4-0 blown lead. He mentioned the number 4 in his tweet. So it was 4-0 blown lead. And this 4-0 blown lead hints at 40. And this sign occurred exactly 40 weeks after the Humanity Star was launched, which was extreme Antichrist symbolism. It was symbolizing the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem before the birth of the Antichrist. And the Humanity Star was supposed to be in orbit for 9 months, which is a human gestation period. After the 9 months, the Humanity Star was supposed to deorbit and fall back to Earth, which was symbolism for Satan falling like lightning from heaven, as Jesus said. And also Revelation chapter 12 speaks of the dragon being thrown down from heaven by the Archangel Michael to earth. And the dragon symbolizes the Antichrist. And so that's confirmation of that. One of the reasons why I knew of this date ahead of time, in fact, I had made videos predicting that there would be a major sign on this day, and it would involve the number 4. And that was because it was game 4 of the World Series. Yes, player number 44, the story of the game was player number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead, and it was game number 4 on the day of the 4 police officers that were wounded. Well, one of the reasons why I knew of this date ahead of time was not only the 40 weeks connection, but also it was exactly 444 days after the big prophetic Revelation chapter 12 sign, which depicts a birth in the night sky. It's the sign described in Revelation chapter 12, the great sign in heaven. And this prophecy in Revelation chapter 12 describes a birth, which confirms the 40 weeks connection, which again symbolizes a birth, 40 weeks, the average human gestation period, to the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, which is of course birth symbolism, because it's symbolizing it's the Antichrist, it's the anti-Star of Bethlehem, it's the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, the humanity star. And the ideology of this thing was supposed to be just a promotion for the company, but it was supposed to be this symbolic thing. It was supposed to glitter in the night sky and be this thing that would bring humanity together. If you read the description of it from the company Rocket Lab, it was very Antichrist. Okay. The philosophy behind it was secular humanism, etc. Again, we have the 4 police officers wounded in the Jewish synagogue, and this was the day of Game 4 of the World Series, in which the story was about player number 44 and how the 4-0 lead was blown, which hinted at 40, and it was 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, the humanity star, and 40 weeks is the average human gestation period. And this Game 4 and player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded was 444 days after the Revelation 12 sign was fulfilled in the night sky, which depicted a birth. And all of this, player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded on the day of Game 4, is exactly 44 months before June 27th, 2022. The date is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And this event, Israel bombing Iran, will ultimately lead to the rise of the Antichrist, the 44th president. So moving on, exactly 6 months after this synagogue shooting that injured 4 police officers was the day of this synagogue shooting in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot. It's amazing, all right? Now, the reason for 6 months is because of this. This shooting here was exactly 36 months, and I just finished explaining how the number 36 is symbolism for 666, which is Antichrist symbolism, which makes this relevant. This shooting was exactly 36 months, and by the way, this is Jews, right? It's the synagogue shooting, to the day that Israel, a nation of Jews, will nuke Iran, all right? Obviously, a shooting is, extreme violence in a shooting in a synagogue, and so is a nuking Iran, okay? The reason why this is also relevant, this 6 months, is because, well, 36 is, so moving on, exactly 6 months after this synagogue shooting that injured 4 police officers was the day of this synagogue shooting in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot. It's amazing, all right? Now, the reason for 6 months is because of this. This shooting here was exactly 36 months, and I just finished explaining how the number 36 is symbolism for 666, which is Antichrist symbolism, which makes this relevant. This shooting was exactly 36 months, and by the way, this is Jews, right? It's the synagogue shooting, to the day that Israel, a nation of Jews, will nuke Iran, all right? Obviously, a shooting is extreme violence in a shooting in a synagogue, and so is a nuking Iran, okay? The reason why this is also relevant, this 6 months, is because, well, 36 is 6 times 6, which confirms the 6 months, but also this shooting was 42 months. In other words, there's a 6 months difference between 42 months and 36 months. And 42 months is mentioned, a period of 42 months is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy, which is referring to the symbolic period of the Antichrist's rule. And it is only symbolic. Prophecy students most of them will be surprised and shocked even to hear that said, because they believe that they will know when the 36 or the 42 months will begin, and it'll all be official, and we're not inside the 42 months, let alone the 7 years they're thinking about too. But the thing is that the truth is that the 3.5 years, which is 42 months, is symbolic of the time times and a half time. Most people think that the time times and a half time is some sort of riddle or puzzle that reveals 3.5 years, but it's the other way around. The 3.5 years is symbolism for the time times and a half time, which is symbolism for tribulation. Even an individual will go through a period of tribulation, followed by a period of doubling or an increased period of that tribulation, the testing of faith, followed by an easing of that tribulation period. And one thing that confirms this is that in Daniel chapter 12, we have the 1260 days, which is the 42 months, and then we also have 1290 days and 1335 days. Well, 1290 days is 30 days more than 1260 days, and 1335 days is 45 days more than the 1290 days. 30 days and 45 days is 3.5 months, which is more 3.5 symbolism. Another thing that confirms this is the extremely amazing and prophetic sign, which is the discovery of the endurance ship, the Shackleton expedition to Antarctica, the discovery of it this year in March of 2022. But anyway, this experience of the men on this ship is complete confirmation of this. So once they disembarked the ship, they experienced their tribulation experiences, endeavors on the ice floe. They also set up, for example, Camp Patience, endurance, tribulation, the patient endurance of the saints during the tribulation period, for example. Okay, so that their experience on the ice floe, which I forget how long that lasted, but it lasted quite a number of days. They had to patiently wait for the ice to break up. And that was followed by their epic sea journey on the dangerous South Atlantic Antarctica Ocean to Elephant Island. Upon reaching Elephant Island, half of the crew were left behind, and 6 men continued on to South Georgia Island. Okay, now which was an even more arduous journey and extreme story of survival. And by the way, this whole endurance Shackleton story is arguably the most extreme story of human endurance and survival of all time. Anyway, there was 2 legs of the sea journey, which hints at the times. So the ice floe time, sea journeys, 2 of them, times. And then once they reached South Georgia Island, they reached the south side. They had to cross over the island to the other side of the island where the whaling station was. South Georgia was an uncharted island, and they had to cross a mountain range. And so 3 people were left on the shore of South Georgia, and only 3 continued on. And the journey across the island was 3.5 days. And that symbolized the easing of the journey. But that was an extremely arduous journey as well. But that was arguably, the easing, symbolizing the easing of the tribulation. So we have the time times and a half time. The ice floe, the 2 sea journeys, and then the crossing of the island. All right, I love to go into that. I don't know if I'll go into that every single video when I'm talking about 42 months, but it's just a recent sign that I've recently discovered. So I've explained it now twice in the 2 recent videos. I'll probably explain it a couple more times, but not every time I go into explaining how we are already inside the last 1,260 days, which began on May 2nd, 2021, and the extremely prophetic sign that occurred on that date confirms it, which is explained in other videos, but it was the splashdown of the SpaceX Dragon capsule. pointing to Revelation chapter 12 with the dragon and his minions being thrown down, the dragon capsule and the dragon crew of SpaceX. It is said in Revelation chapter 12 that the dragon and his angels were thrown down from heaven to earth at the beginning of the 1,260 days, the final 42 months. All right, now, coming back to this Poway, California shooting, the media stories talked about how it was a population of 50,000, this town in California. It's very similar to how the media kept talking about how it was rich Squirrel Hill. For whatever reason, the media had to, preface the talk of these towns with the adjective rich, and also had to continually talk about the size of the town. Well, the reason why they continued to talk about the size of the town is because it's pointing to the Chernobyl disaster. Okay, the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine forced the evacuation of the town Pripyat, Ukraine, which had a population of 50,000. And it was exactly 33 years before this synagogue shooting in the town of 50,000, in which 4 people were shot. And the Chernobyl disaster was the explosion of reactor number 4. Absolutely stunning. This is also Antichrist symbolism, by the way, because this town Pripyat was built for the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And it was designed by the communist socialists with this, they had this ideal city in mind. It was supposed to be this ideal utopia, community city, right? That was the design of it, which is Antichrist symbolism. The Antichrist will fool the majority of people on earth and his plan for utopia to solve the world's problems with the extreme crisis that comes. All right, so that's what Pripyat symbolizes. Today, this town Pripyat is a tourist destination because it is this ghost town that has been overgrown with forest, wildlife meanders through the former streets of the town, and it's quite interesting because of this. But it is also symbolism of, in a way, Armageddon, or the apocalypse or end times, this future utopia gone bad. Now, 33 years is prophetic, arguably, but it's confirmed because it symbolizes the Trinity in Christ. But it's confirmed by this here, which is this 36 months connection, as I was explaining already. Now, that is a second witness to this 36 years connection. And that's, by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter. And that's what makes this true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique from everything else on the internet. And so, again, as I explained, 36 is symbolism for 666 and Antichrist symbolism, which is why it connects with the Pripyat. And it's reactor number 4 because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And that's why it's reactor 4 connecting with the 4 shot in the synagogue. It's because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And so 36 years after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, and by the way, it's in Ukraine, which is the country made up of 44 million people. Prior to the Russia invasion, it was 44 million people, and it's being led by a leader that is 44 years old, who is Antichrist symbolism. Zelensky, which is why he spoke at the UN Security Council, for example, on the same day that the 44th president returned for the first time to the White House on April 5th. But that's another story. But Israel will use nuclear bombs to bomb and destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program exactly 36 years after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster. That's absolutely stunning. This is of course, how I first started looking at April 26th. And then all of the other pieces started fitting, which is explained in this video and the other videos. If you happen to notice that this date for this shooting was on the 27th, and technically not an exact 33 years and 36 months to these dates, which are on the 26th, the reason why this was done, it still is relevant because this 26th would be the end of 36 months. But the reason why God needed to do this, one reason, is because this day here was the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of First Fruits, and that begins the 50-day count to Pentecost. And so that's why, for example, the town was 50,000. And this is relevant because this also occurred in conjunction with these other signs that were also the signs relevant to the Feast of First Fruits and the beginning of this Omer count of 49 and 50 days to Pentecost, which is described in the Bible. And for example, there was the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers Trump sign, which I won't explain right now. And also the lunar module left over from the Apollo program that was discovered orbiting around the moon, 50,000 feet above the moon. It was announced, the story came out on this day as well. And it was the 50th anniversary. 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the landing on the moon. But the point is that this had to occur on this date. Also, the signs on October 27th in Game 4, including the 4 police officers wounded in Rich Squirrel Hill in that synagogue shooting, was also the 27th. And that's another reason why this needed to occur on the 27th and not the 26th in this case. And so because of all of these other confirmations, it's appreciated that this is exactly what's going on here, is that it is what God needed to do in order to develop his signs and connections here in this case. All right, now returning back to this, 144 is 12 times 12, and 144 is a very prominent and prophetic number in the book of Revelation, and it is used in context of the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 tribes, the 12,000 in each tribe. And we're talking about the synagogue shooting, and it connects exactly with 144 weeks, which, by the way, is Jews, and we're talking about Israel here in this video and diagram and trail of signs. And so it connects with 144 weeks exactly to the Squirrel Hill shooting, which is amazing. Okay, so these two synagogue shootings connect, sorry, this isn't a shooting, but they connect with the Squirrel Hill bridge collapse. Again, the bridge collapsed right next to Squirrel Hill. And 4 people had to be rushed to hospital, which is confirmation of all of this. 4 people shot, 4 police officers wounded. In other words, this bridge collapse connects extremely profoundly with its 4 injured that went to hospital, with the 4 shot and the 4 police officers wounded. Okay, now this needs to be confirmed with a second witness, this 13 days. It is Antichrist symbolism, and it does fit because of this, Antichrist symbolism in these signs here and here. But there's another confirmation which involves a number, which is that this sign here, this date, which by the way was January 28th, 2022, the bridge collapse and Biden's visit was 130 days to the day that Kamala Harris will crash. So the bridge collapsed and caused the crash of the bus. What's another thing? The bridge collapsed, it just happened to collapse when the big, long city bus was on it. And anyway, so it was a crash. It was a crash from a height above ground to the ground, just like how Kamala Harris will crash from a height in her plane to the ground. And this is connecting to the crash of Kamala Harris in her airplane on June 7th, 2022. And her death will lead the way to the Antichrist becoming president again. Michelle Obama will replace Kamala Harris, and then later Barack Obama will replace Michelle Obama. Okay, and so obviously the number 130 is symbolism for the number 13, which, as I explained, is symbolism for the Antichrist. And what else also confirming this is that 130 days after the day that Kamala Harris will die will be the day that Barack Obama will become the 47th president. He will either be sworn in on this day, or possibly the Supreme Court will rule on the 22nd Amendment, which will allow him to become president again. The 22nd Amendment restricts someone from being elected to the office more than twice. Barack Obama will be appointed instead, thus overcoming the election part of the 22nd Amendment. All right, now, God pairs numbers together, and if you think about it, that's how he would develop and confirm his big picture of signs, as they are second witnesses when they are paired together. And he pairs these particular numbers together frequently to confirm the signs and connections, including pairing 23 and 44 to point to the 44th president, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And actually, coincidentally, I just mentioned that date when Zelensky was at the UN and Barack Obama was visiting the White House again for the first time, supposedly for celebrating his passage of Obamacare, which is Antichrist symbolism in itself. Nationalized health care will be how the Antichrist will persecute God's people through the mark of the Antichrist, which is the VACCINE and is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And I explain more about that in other videos. And so that's why the 44th president also is a pairing of 23 and 44. Also, Zelensky is 44 years old. He represents the nation of 44 million people. And he spoke at the UN on this day. And that's because collective security and NATO is Antichrist and is a major sin. When we read the Bible, we see that Israel, when it developed these collective security agreements and partnerships with other kings, they suffered and were defeated. And so it's clear in the Bible. The reason is because, and if we read about it too in 2nd Chronicles, when these kings of Judah did this, they emptied the temple, the temple, the house of God, of its silver and gold to bribe these other kings to come to their help, which was also symbolic because the reason is that relying on collective security agreements with other nations is tantamount to not trusting in God and rebellion against God. There is also the warnings in the book of Jeremiah to not go down to Egypt and make alliances, military alliances with Egypt. But the Jews didn't heed Jeremiah's warning, and they did so anyway, and then they suffered ruination. Isaiah chapter 31, for example, woe to those who go down to Egypt and rely on horses. This chapter finishes with the Antichrist being defeated by the Messiah at the second coming. So NATO is Antichrist, and so is collective security. And I'll say this, not only is this leading to the Antichrist, who will promise peace and security, as Paul prophesied in his writings, and that's why Zelensky's speaking at the UN calling for collective security. He is symbolizing the Antichrist. That's why he's 44 years old and represents the nation of 44 million people. And that's why he spoke at the UN on the day that the 44th president made his big triumphant return to the White House. We are getting ourselves into trouble, America that is. And again, America is God's Gentile nation. And so this is why America was blessed with its geography in between two expansive oceans. We don't need these security agreements. And for the first couple of hundred years, the founders also had a foreign policy of non-interventionism. That changed, unfortunately, at the end of the 19th century. But for the first 100 years after the founders, that was the foreign policy of America. And it's the policy that it should be. Because, again, as I'm saying, it's sin to be getting involved in these permanent security arrangements with other nations, because it's tantamount to not trusting in God. It's a form of rebellion against God, and America will be judged for it. And actually, the Antichrist is going to emerge as a result of this conflict in Ukraine. That's where this is all going. It's headed to a new world order of collective security in which NATO, for example, or a NATO-like organization is extended to the entire world. That's why the mass formation, the collective mass psychosis, totalitarianism that's extended beyond COVID and the VACCINE into the Ukraine conflict. You cannot say anything critical. It's if you do of Ukraine or the president or anything contrary to the narrative. If you do, it's disinformation. It needs to be censored, and you are dangerous. You are a traitor as well. You are also immoral. Okay, that's the reason. The reason for that is because it's all leading to the Antichrist. Okay, and just like Zelensky, how he banned 11 political parties and shut down media and condensed it into one media outlet. That will happen in the name of peace and security and war, because the goal here for Satan and the powers of the darkness is to escalate this war and bring America into the war in order to be able to persecute conservatives and Christians and any opposition to the war effort. Okay? And the plan for collective security and the new world order. In fact, if we use Israel as a template, it is clear from the Bible that standing armies for a nation are wrong and evil. This will be a shock for many people, but America should not have a standing army, nor should any country have a standing army. The defense of a nation lies in the hands of its citizens. Every male of age needs to be equipped and trained with military-grade weapons. And this is the only way to preserve freedom and liberty and defend a nation from a foreign enemy and a tyrannical leader that will turn on its citizens, which will happen eventually with a standing army, and is about to happen within the next few months in America. Furthermore, the tyranny that has occurred since 2020 would not have occurred had the citizens had the power that they should have. Now, I'm just going to play a short clip of someone else explaining this much better and the history involved with this going back 800 years. It's very interesting, which is why I'm playing this clip in the middle of this video. And it is necessary to know this information.
And this is where you American gun owners are in real trouble, and where your nation is in trouble. Your amendment is going down in flames because of the way it's being redefined. And so are all the other 9 major amendments of the Bill of Rights, including the 10th Amendment, including the First Amendment. Okay, when your free speech and my free speech is certainly being stolen away from us. Your guns will have no future protection once public opinion and the opinion of judges is on the side of the Biden definition of the Constitution. Cowardly legislatures, like we saw in the year 2020, will go along with this, just as they tolerated unlawful balloting practices and arbitrary medical regulations. You saw that. I saw that. They didn't have backbone because the average legislature does not know history or the text of the Constitution. Now, here's how you can change that. You need to refute the Biden machine with historical fact. And let me give you 14 facts just to get you in the fight. And you need to roll these out. You need to be talking about these. If you're serious about the Second Amendment, you need to start getting these into the minds of people and replacing what they have been told in public schools and in their universities and by the Biden machine over the last 40 years, starting with the year 1792. Okay? And we're going to work our way backwards because I want you to see where there's a connection between the Second Amendment as it was written and really 800 years of history, and why it's so wrong for anyone to come along and say, well, it's obsolete now because we don't have muskets anymore. No, there's our principles behind it that make it absolutely required that we hang on to it, protect it, and preserve it. So only a year after, look at this year now, only a year after the ratification of the Constitution and the Second Amendment, Congress passed legislation which strengthened, it even went beyond the Second Amendment. It strengthened the Second Amendment principles. The laws upheld that were passed then, 1792, upheld the tradition that civilian citizens must arm themselves with military weapons of war. These were the Militia Acts of 1792. And it said citizens are required by law to equip themselves with their own musket, their bayonet war belt, 2 spare flints, a box able to contain not less than 24 suitable cartridges, and a knapsack. I mean, this was the weaponry of the Minuteman. It was also the weaponry of the Redcoat, the infantrymen who invaded our country. I mean, we were using military weaponry to preserve our freedom. And in times of peace, citizens need this just in case a tyrannical ruler decides to steal freedom away also. This is military weaponry of destruction. And going back even before the Second Amendment, the American colonists spoke this language. They spoke this centuries-old language because it was a deep-running foundation of English common law. Look at the Virginia Colony Declaration of Rights. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Now look at this one, Pennsylvania, that colony's declaration of 1776. The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. The North Carolina Colony Declaration. The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of the state. And so when a time comes to write the Second Amendment for the new American Constitution, they are used to these ideas in this language because they are rooted in reality and in history. The Massachusetts Colony Declaration of Rights in 1780. The people have a right to keep and bear arms for the common defense. Now look at this quote by a cavalry officer who fought with Washington, Henry Lee, who understood this and tried to summarize it in one little sentence. And this captures that very, very well. Every man capable of bearing arms. And back then, as we will see as we go back in history, they believed that every man roughly aged 15 to 60 should be capable of training themselves in arms and bearing arms for the defense of their nation against intruders or against their own governments. So Henry Lee says this: every man capable of bearing arms must use them in aid or in opposition to the country of his birth. Okay, now how does that work? Well, if you have an invading army coming after you, all of your people are well trained in arms and they own all their own weaponry. They can gather together and they can repel the enemy. Or if a tyrant wants to seize control of all the people and all their goods and turn them back into slaves, then they have the ability then to rise up against him and depose him or replace him. Now, going back in history, 1644, Massachusetts colony law, as far back as that, every citizen is to provide for himself and each under him able to bear arms, a sufficient musket and other serviceable piece, as well as 2 pounds of powder and 10 pounds of bullets. Do you see how specific these things get? Yes, this is weaponry of war. These are weapons of mass destruction. When you get 1,000 men out there from your community who've trained together, and each of whom have all these things, they don't need to wait to be provided them by the government. They're ready to throw these over their shoulders and go out and face an enemy and defeat him. 1631 is a common law of the time. All men that are fitting are to bear arms and to bring their pieces to the church upon pain of every offense. And across the colonies, north to south, there were laws like these saying, you need to bring these to church on pain of every offense. There would be some sort of a punishment, usually a fine of tobacco or something. And what they would do in the afternoons after church was to drill, to practice, to get together and practice loading. I mean, you know, you could get to the point where you could stuff gunpowder into a musket 3 times every minute and a musket ball and fire accurately 3 times every minute. Look at the year 1541. And this is a law going back across the Atlantic into England. All inhabitants of cities and towns may have and keep in every one of their houses handguns, hagbutts, and demi-hakes. Okay, these are all weapons of mass destruction. These are all weapons of warfare, and they're to be in the hands of the citizens and in every home. They're military weapons of war. 1511, the weapons of war archery laws, and these changed quite a bit, but they were all consistent with the very same principle. All fathers were to provide their sons with appropriate bows and arrows and to teach them how to shoot the bows starting at age 7 and have these weapons in their home, right? 1363, the archery laws required practice of archery on Sundays and holy days and forbade on pain of death all sport that took up time better spent on war training, especially archery practice. So in some places of England, it was, people were tempted to replace the serious things of responsible living and responsible preparation against potential enemies. And England had a lot of potential enemies because they were such a rich nation. And there were invaders all the time. And they knew that they should stay prepared and stay armed and be trained in arms. Just owning arms in your home is not enough. You need to continue to be training. The year 1285, the Statute of Winchester, a really important one. It's a rather long statute. It ordered men in every village, aged 15 to 60, to be armed for defense and keeping of the peace with military weapons of war. The year 1181, and I won't go back further than this, but you get the picture, don't you? The Assize of Arms of Henry II. All classes of men were to arm themselves with military weaponry. And it was specific again, a shirt of mail, a helmet, a shield, and a lance. And these two could be, the lance could be a weapon of mass destruction in the right hands of someone who's trained with all of his neighbors to go out to war together. Now, when any politician says that military weapons of war have no place in civilian hands, you have to be able to refute that and say why it's not true. Private military-grade weapons are the protectors of liberty and have been since the days of King Alfred and King Canute and King Henry and other good rulers who wanted liberty for their people. Now, the tyrants who wanted something else, who wanted to take liberty away, they always had to first get the weapons out of the hands of the citizenry, and then they had to create permanent government armies. And so the American founders knew this history, that these were the two pillars of liberty. The citizens all must be armed. Okay, do you understand that? No government can build up for itself a standing army and keep a standing army of soldiers who can be turned against the citizens. And so our founders were determined to preserve these lessons, learn from history, learn the hard way, learn the bloody way. Because freedom does rest on the realities of this armed citizenry and the absence of standing armies. Daniel Webster put it this way in the year of the Constitution in 1787. He said this: before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. And that's true. That was even true at that time. It's become even worse now, even in your day. The supreme power in America, meaning the new government that's being formed by this new Constitution, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, the supreme power there cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, meaning by weaponry, because the whole body of the people are armed. And that's how it was then, and that's how it was meant to be. And so disarmament cannot happen. We can't change history, the truths of history. We can't change the meaning and the intent of the framers of the Constitution just because certain tyrannical people want to disarm the people so that they can exert more power over them. So learn your history. Teach it to everyone in your state. And do not let the Bill of Rights be redefined out of existence.
Well, anyway, that's why this was 23 days. Because, again, the Antichrist wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, the basketball president. That's why it's 23 days after this day here. Now, okay, this is a really big day. This was a day that was predicted ahead of time. I predicted that there would be explosions involving the U.S. on this day, and it ended up being, I predicted that the dirty bomb would be detonated in Manhattan on this day, but it ended up being another step along the way to that day, and I will explain that. But this was the day that the GOAT of football, the greatest of all time, Tom Brady, announced in a tweet that he was going to return for a 23rd season. He mentioned 23rd in his tweet, and this return of the GOAT of football coincided with the announcement in a tweet of the 44th president that he had COVID and told everyone that they should get the vaccine, which is, of course, again, the mark of the Antichrist, and it connects with 23 days to his return to the White House. Okay, and he will return as president this autumn, which is why the GOAT, which is Antichrist symbolism, GOAT of football, mentioned his return in the autumn for another season, football season. Also, the news stories regarding the Brady's announcement to return and play another year also mentioned his age, which is 44 years old. And so the 23 days is paired with the 44 here, the 44 years old and the 44th president. And for that matter, these two, as I will explain, 44 days and 44 days, are also confirmed with the 44 years and the 44th president. Okay. Now on this day were the 12 rockets that were fired from Iran, which exploded right near the U.S. consulate in northern Iraq. These were explosions involving the U.S., which was amazing because I had predicted that ahead of time. Also, this was the day that rockets fired by Russia exploded right next to the border of Poland, which was the location of the base, the military base or place where U.S. operatives train Ukrainians and their soldiers and bring in and supply them with weapons. Just hours before this, Russia had warned the U.S. that this sort of thing was a legitimate target. And this is as close as Russia gets to bombing America without actually bombing America. Because Poland is part of NATO, which, if we're honest, is essentially a U.S. organization. And so that's why it was right on the border of NATO and America, therefore. Okay. And so it was 12 rockets, and the GOAT wears jersey number 12, Tom Brady. That hinted at 12 times 12, 144, and 144 days after this will be the day of I believe, the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on the birthday of the 44th president, August 4th. Anyway, this in turn connects with 44 days, and again is confirmed with the 23rd season, and also this 23 days connection here. It's 44 days to the day that Israel will nuke Iran, okay? So from the day that Israel will nuke Iran, it is 44 days back to this sign, which includes explosions in the Middle East, for that matter, too, by the way. And this, in turn, is another 44 days to this day here, which is extremely prophetic, when the 4 people injured that went to hospital, a confirmation of the 44, because it connects with the 4 police officers and the 4 people shot in these 2 synagogue shootings, as I just explained. So there you have it, my friends. I believe I've explained everything in this video now. It is just amazing. All right, there's one more thing here, and that is that back from the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Iran, it is exactly 23 weeks, which is a number of weeks that God uses frequently in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. For one thing, it is symbolism for the Antichrist, the president that played basketball and wore jersey number 23. But also 23 weeks is also coincidentally almost exactly 44% of a year. And God pairs 23 and 44 all of the time in order to confirm the signs and connections. Anyway, exactly 23 years back is the day of this IAEA report, which is the international organization that monitors nuclear weapons programs or nuclear technology around the world. And so this date, by the way, too, was November 17th, which is confirmation of the 23 weeks, because this date here is also Barack Obama's symbolism, because Barack Obama's name in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, which is what Jesus said when he said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Barak is the word for lightning in Hebrew, and Bama is the word for high place, which is a metaphor used for heaven, for example, in the Bible, for example, in Isaiah chapter 14, when it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, but also the ancient Jews would conduct their false religious idolatrous worship on the tops of mountains, and the metaphor used for that was the high places. And so, in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, is the word for from. So, Barack Obama, lightning from heaven. Well, anyway, the word Bama is the 1,117th word in Strong's Hebrew concordance. And so that's why God uses the date, for example, here in 2021 and also in 2020, for example, to symbolize this. In 2020, that was the day that Barack Obama released his extremely prophetic autobiography, A Promised Land, on November 17th. And so anyway, yeah, that confirms the 23 weeks connection. Well, on this day was the day that the IAEA released its report regarding the Natanz. And it was the report coming after the Natanz explosion and blackout, which was mentioned at the beginning of this video on April 11th. On November 17th, I'm just reading from Wikipedia, 2021, the IAEA released their quarterly safeguards report regarding verification and monitoring in the Islamic Republic of Iran in light of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. The report concludes that the number of enriching IR-1 cascades and IR-2M cascades at the Natanz fuel enrichment plant appear to have almost fully recovered from a sabotage incident in April. Iran installed 31 cascades of IR-1 centrifuges, 6 cascades, and on, etc. So that's really relevant here because, in other words, what this IAEA report is stating is that they had fully recovered from the sabotage that Israel did in April. And this is very important in this trail of signs, as we can see. In fact, this video could theoretically be titled this, although I won't do that because no one will recognize really what I'm talking about. But this is arguably one of the main things about this entire video, because of it being pointing to this date here when Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. And so anyway, that's why this is relevant. The IAEA report confirming that they have recovered, which is why Israel will now need to nuclear bomb these facilities and destroy them once and for all. And that's why it's an extremely prophetic 23 weeks connection after this IAEA report. In terms of God's prophetic signs and knowing what God is doing, after having watched this video, you are now one of the most informed people on the planet. The question is, what will you now do with this information? And how many people will you help get this video to? Keep on posting the link to this video everywhere in social media. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus, please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.